Welcome to the Practical Buddhist. Today's talk is about the goal of Buddhism. What is Buddhism about? Why do we walk the path of Buddhism? A friend once said that when someone walks through the doors of temple, he or she wants to end their suffering. That was certainly true in my case. And that, my friends, is the essence of Buddhism. Buddhism is not a religion. There is no God. There is no creation story. There are no commandments, or else. Buddhism is a way of life, a suggestion of how to live life well as a human being free of suffering. What then, you may be wondering, is practical Buddhism? It is taking the teaching of the Buddha, that is referred to as the Dharma, and focusing on how we implement it to improve our everyday lives. It's grounding Buddhist practice in the challenges we face every day. It's answering, how do you make your way in life as a Buddhist? What I hope to do in this first video is briefly explain a few key points of Buddhism. They will be discussed in much greater and neater detail in later videos. But first, I want to give you some understanding of, let's say, the skeletal structure of Buddhist thought. When the Buddha set turning the wheel of the Dharma, his first teaching was about suffering, the fact of it, the cause of our suffering, how to end our suffering, and the path to reach that end. All of the Dharma should be seen in that context. Simply put, to end our suffering, we must change the way we relate to ourselves and the world around us. Let me repeat that. To end our suffering, we must change the way we relate to ourselves and the world around us. As you can imagine, this is a real challenge. There are two primary keys to accomplishing this. The first is understanding that all our emotions, judgments, cravings, attachments, our feelings and perceptions are products of our ego mind, and they have no inherent existence. What do I mean by no inherent existence? What I mean is that they exist only in our mind. They do not exist in the object or experience that brings the emotional reaction. They certainly feel very real to us, but they do not reflect reality. They are instead reality as seen through the lens of our ego mind. Our knowledge of ourselves and all things is thus biased and flawed. And it is these emotions and cravings, how we relate to our experience, not the experience itself, that causes our suffering. We suffer because of how we process our life experiences. This way of looking at things is certainly contrary to the way we typically analyze things. But if you stop and think about it, you'll see its truth. Let me give you an example. Two people can experience the same thing, and yet one reacts to it one way, let's say with fear or anger, and suffers, while the other experiences it a different way, with dispassion, free of labels, knowing it's just the way it is, and so that person does not suffer. Same facts, but very different emotional outcome. More on this in future videos. In order to take this understanding of the lack of inherent existence of our feelings and perceptions and end our suffering, we need to be able to say that our ego mind is not our true self. Because if our ego were our true self, we would be stuck with these emotions. We would be stuck with suffering. But, you will ask, if we are not our ego, the being we've identified with our entire life, who are we? The answer is, our true self is our true Buddha nature, our heart. We are each born with a Buddha nature inside us, and it stays with us throughout our life. This is the second key, belief in our true Buddha nature, which is light, love, faith, trust, humility, compassion, gratefulness, joy, contentment, strength, courage, and wisdom. You're probably scratching your head and asking yourself, is this for real? I know that on first hearing, it sounds fantastical, but bear with me. And keep in mind that the mystical traditions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all teach the same thing. They just call it divine essence. What happens after birth, and especially during our formative years when the ego develops, is that our Buddha nature, or divine essence, which I have found to be a passive force, gets buried under the weight of our very aggressive ego mind's reaction to our life experiences. And so we typically grow up insecure and having a negative outlook on much of life. Our task, therefore, regardless of your religious faith, is to rediscover our true self and disassociate ourselves from our ego mind, which is without question a challenge and which will be the subject in an indirect or direct way of virtually all future videos. Most Buddhist writing just talks about the first key. Why do I place equal emphasis on the second? Because whenever we negate something, we must replace it with something positive, or else it will rush right back in. Because if you continue to identify with your ego, it will not allow you to take the steps necessary to end your suffering. It is this faith in our true self that enables us to have the courage to disassociate ourselves from the conventional reality of our ego mind. It is this faith that empowers us to surrender our ego to our true Buddha nature, or in the language of 12-step, to turn our will and our life over to the care of our true Buddha nature. This is the lesson taught to me by two Vietnamese Zen monks, whose view of the Dharma I was exposed to when living in rural Michigan during the first decade of my practice. The monks said that the choice is ours. We have but to surrender our ego to our true Buddha nature. Ha! It sounds so simple and straightforward, but it is anything but that. The choice is indeed ours, but the challenge is great because of the deeply rooted strength of our ego mind and our psyche. But through a disciplined meditation practice and a disciplined approach to life, we can slowly, incrementally, free ourselves from our ego mind and our suffering and find the inner peace and happiness that is our birthright. Yes, it is your birthright. Do not be discouraged. This will not happen overnight. It requires much time, effort, and diligence. It is indeed the work of a lifetime. But slowly you will begin to see the light, and even the first tiny glimmer of truth and peace will provide you with the faith to continue on the path. Because once you experience true peace, you will never want to return to the world of suffering. May you experience peace and happiness.